Okay, I want to introduce a very, very exciting speaker and something that we all should care about and that we can all learn from profoundly. We've talked about the impact of storytelling, all right? So when you go into your story, whether you are a scientist, a reporter, a filmmaker, an advocate, an activist, you have to say, what do I want from this? What am I trying to do? Inform, inspire, persuade, mobilize? Do I want action out of this? Am I trying to convey best practices? Well, the National Geographic Society and National Geographic has been doing this for a very long time, and they have a huge audience, and they have a huge capacity. And so it's my great pleasure to introduce, as I said, the person with the best job title on the planet, Senior Vice President Storytelling. Did I leave out senior last time? Oh my God, it's even better. Senior Vice President Storytelling, Kaitlin Yarnall. Kaitlin, come on up. Kaitlin is responsible for Nat Geo's impact in journalism, photography, and data visualization, among other things. She also happens to be a GW alum.
True.
School of?
Geography.
So from geography to Nat Geo?
Yep.
And now to us and Planet Forward. So welcome, welcome. We're delighted to have you. And I'm getting out of here because the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Frank. And I'm so happy to be here. As Frank said, it's kind of a full circle for me. I never thought I would spend as much time on the East Coast as I ended up having, but my two homes have really been National Geographic and George Washington University, so it's fun to be able to pull them together in this talk. And so I think that all good stories start with an origin story, right? Where did we come from? Why are we here? This is my origin story. Like I said, came from the West Coast. I grew up in the little town of Eureka, California. It's in Humboldt County, California, about 5 to 6 hours north of San Francisco if you're driving. And you'll see that I was kind of feral as a child, like I think most good explorers were raised that way. And you'll see there's a picture of me and my dad there fishing. And I don't want you to think that I was raised by my dad alone. I was also raised by my mom, who happens to be in the audience today. So this is a big shout out to Mom.
Where's Mom?
Mom's in the back row. She's filming me, I think. So as you can see here, I was raised with wide open adventure kind of as part of what was interesting to me, what was fun to me. And I was raised by parents who studied science and the process of inquiry and why. And whether, why did that starfish do what it did was just natural to me. And I think that translated into journalism. When I left California, after going to undergrad, I ended up at National Geographic. I was a cartographer first. You'll see that center picture. Good old shout out to Microsoft Windows 2000. I started making maps for the magazine and for atlases at National Geographic. I also went to grad school here at GW. That you'll see that picture of me and a bunch of poultry is when I was doing field work and doing research in Bolivia with Dr. Marie Price, who some of you, if you have a chance to take one of her classes, do. But then it led me back to National Geographic, and I learned journalism. I learned journalism on the job. I learned storytelling through the magazine. So that picture on the upper right was when I was one of the creative directors in the magazine, working probably very late on a layout and figuring out how to tell a story with the most visual impact. And I learned that from the Masters of Visual Storytelling and Journalism. One of them's in the audience, Dennis Dimmick, was our longtime environment editor, photographer, photo editor. But really the theme through that was the same: exploration, inquiry, stories. Why does that starfish do what it does was the same as why do remittance flows across Latin America matter? And why does it matter to me? And then why does it matter to an audience? And is it worth sharing and telling? So National Geographic also has an origin story. We were founded here in Washington, never related to the government, in 1888, just a few blocks from here at the Cosmos Club. And it was a group of white gentlemen who were the innovators, the pioneers of their time. They were the steampunk millennials, right, of their day. These are people like Alexander Graham Bell, who you see there, and Wesley Powell, and they were the explorers, the innovators, the technologists. And they had this idea to create a club to explore the world and all that's in it, and to diffuse that knowledge, to share it. And so how were they going to share it? They were going to share it in a journal, and the journal was called the National Geographic Magazine. That's the first issue there from 1888. And it was really a way to go out, explore the world, and bring back their discoveries. Well, by 1912, they were doing quite well. Financially, they had $43,000 in the bank, which by then was good for them. And so they started sponsoring science and exploration. And that has been the legacy of the National Geographic for 130 years. Grants, fellowships, exploration. We have one of our luminary explorers in residence, Dr. Tom Lovejoy, here in the front row. But these are people like Tom or the Leakeys or Jane Goodall, who you see here, and that has continued to today. We sponsor scientists to go out into the field. They make discoveries, they come back, and we reported on it. The journalists reported on it and shared it through the world through the National Geographic magazine. So that was our history for, over 100 years. And then about 3 years ago, we changed. We split into two companies, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. This is not a business summit. This is about storytelling and the environment. But I think it's an interesting way to think about business models and an interesting way to think about communication and audience and the purpose of a company. So National Geographic Society is a nonprofit where I sit now, and we give over 500 grants a year. And we now have expanded these grants to not only biologists and anthropologists, but to teachers, to photographers, to journalists, to technologists, to engineers who are making impact. National Geographic Partners is our for-profit arm. That is the magazine, expeditions. If you're very lucky, you get to go on one of the Lindblad Expeditions, which is part of our for-profit arm. Books, our .com. And that joint venture is owned by the nonprofit and also by Disney, right? And the profits from all of those for-profit media companies are what fund and sustain the nonprofit National Geographic Society. So I worked for years in the magazine, moved over to the nonprofit side, and now I have the ridiculously privileged opportunity to tell stories and think about stories all towards the mission of a planet in balance. And so we want to get closer to a planet in balance. And that doesn't just mean ecologically. That doesn't just mean in terms of biodiversity. That means in terms of humanity. How do we get to a place of balance so that all people and all life forms are taken care of and that we can live sustainably? So what does that mean? It means right now we have 3 major program imperatives. We want to protect the natural world. We have a push towards 30% of the planet protected by 2030. We want to live smarter on our planet. And that sounds broad. You've seen some of our work on plastics that Frank opened with today. But we're looking at fresh water and food and energy. And then we really want to empower the next generation of planetary stewards. And that can be anything from teachers and students to our Explorers Network. And I want to talk to you about how you all can get involved in that. So how do we do this? We are not just a magazine, we're not just a cable channel. We have 3 core assets that we talk about. We have science and exploration, we have storytelling, and we have education. So science and exploration, we go out and we empower others to go out, explore, discover, publish, create the scientific record that we need. Storytelling is me and my teams, is we document that. We make people care. And then education is how do we push that out to the next generation so that they may do better than we have. So I'm going to talk to you about just a couple of the programs that we're doing this on and how we're seeing true impact thanks to our science, exploration, and then storytelling. So one is called Pristine Seas, and this is the work of Dr. Enrique Sala. You'll see a video about him in just a moment. But Enrique really set out to protect the oceans. How do we identify the most pristine places on the planet and then protect them in the ocean? And what's interesting about his model and why I'm talking to you about it is because Enrique really realized that the National Geographic special sauce is that ability to tell a story and reach an audience. So he goes to a place, he does a biological survey to say, what's the life like in this ocean place? Why is it worth saving? Here's all the scientific evidence you need to see why this place is special, unique, and worth saving. He then does economic analysis. How will you, government of, say, Chile or Argentina or Mozambique, make more money by protecting this place than by allowing fishing or other extractive industries to take hold? But then where my team comes in is we make usually a documentary. We make a documentary that talks about the wonder of the place. Look at the biodiversity of life here. Look at everything that's happening in this place, and don't you want to save it? Now, we don't just make documentaries to save things and put them out there and hope it's going to work. That doesn't work. What we do is we think about who is the audience that we're trying to reach. If you are trying to protect an area in the ocean, who has the power to do that? Do corporations have the power to protect an area?
They have the power to
Not pollute it, correct. But who has the actual power? It's a government, right? Who can decide a protected area as a government? In some countries, it's the president. In some countries, it's a prime minister. In some countries, it's the environment minister. So we do deep analysis on who has the power to protect that area. Then we produce the scientific, the economic analysis we need, but then we produce a piece of media that speaks to that person. Purpose, to protect, audience, whoever has the power. And so let me tell you that a documentary you make for a Russian decision maker is different than one you make for a Latin American one. Right? And oftentimes these pieces of media get out to a wider audience because we think they're quite good, but sometimes they don't, and that's okay, because they are made for impact. So I'll show you a little video about the program. Just quickly, these are all the protected areas that we've created. So Enrique set a goal to protect 20 protected places by 2020. We're at 21, and it's 2019. So it's been a success. So here's our, what we call our Pristine Seas trailer.
We are defined by the environments that we live in. When they say, where do you come? The first thing that comes to my mind is the reef, the forest, the corals. Maybe that's who I am.
The moment I set my eyes on these remote islands, I know why we're here.
This place is melting like a popsicle in Arizona in the summertime.
The big fish are gone. They have been fished out.
And it only takes a few fishing boats, and they can remove hundreds of years of biomass in just a very short period of time.
After 10 years as a professor, I realized that I was just writing the obituary of the ocean. I quit academia and assembled a team to do something about it. I want to show to the world what the ocean was like hundreds of years ago and why we have to preserve them. This is one of these rare places on Earth, a time machine, where we can see the ocean of the past.
What we do is hunt out the last pristine places in the ocean and protect them.
The ocean has amazing regenerative power. We just need to let it heal itself.
In one single pulse, in one immeasurably powerful heartbeat, the ocean has just changed my life.
So you can see, what audience do we think this was made for? This was made for such an American audience, wasn't it? If you start spending time with international media, you see that base, there's heroes, there's a threat, right? It works. We're attuned to that. It's our culture. It's what we expect, and it makes us want to do something. It makes us want to stand up and clap, right? So knowing that and understanding who your audience is and what you want them to do is powerful. The corporate America understands this, right? It's why we buy stuff. I spent this morning listening to how we're trying to switch that model, but it works. We saw those advertisements. Disposability is a good thing, right, in those advertisements. So, I'm gonna go back one. So, Pristine Seas was such a successful initiative, continues to be, that it has inspired other projects at National Geographic. I wanna tell you a terrestrial story, so one that's not just about the ocean. This is a map of the whole Okavango watershed. So the Okavango Delta is one of the most biodiverse places in Africa. It drives much of the tourism to the continent. And it is this amazing wetland, abundant in wildlife that tourists flock to in Botswana. But like all watersheds, the water comes from somewhere else, right? It comes from the Angolan highlands. And Angola had a very bloody civil war for years. As peace has come to Angola, what has happened? Extractive industries have come in and started to divert the watershed. And we had another explorer inspired by Enrique named Dr. Steve Boys, who was interested in getting those headlands protected. So again, same model. We did an expedition all the way down the water source, from the source to the sand, as he calls it. It's not source to sea, source to sand, to understand the biodiversity of the river system, map it. We didn't even know where the headlands were. But then we also needed to create media, because we knew we needed to speak to the hearts of people to try to protect this area. Now, protecting areas in Angola is very different than protected areas in other parts of the world. We had to create a public groundswell, and it couldn't just be within Angola. They didn't have a rich enough or mature enough media network to be able to do that. So we went international. We built international pressure to build this protected area. And that came in the form of a film that premiered at Tribeca. So I'm just going to show you this film.
Imagine that you were told that once upon a time, this land was so famous because of its elephants. And then you were told that that's gone.
We have the power to protect, and we have the power to destroy. And we're sitting with that choice now.
We came from the wilderness. It is part of our journey. It is the birthplace of religion, the birthplace of science.
I know, it's okay. It's going past.
A wilderness that used to extend all the way up to the sources of these rivers was turned into a battlefield.
It's just white guy coming to the hot spot of war in Angola, surrounded by mines, to a place no one has even heard of. How insane!
See, this is it right there. Look, that's the floodplain.
I don't know what lives up there. No one does.
Ready, snaps.
1, 2, 3.
Our mission is to survey the entire system, traveling 1,500 miles downriver.
I'm questioning everything in life at this point.
This is our planet.
They are elephants.
Without it, we will go extinct.
I needed something. I needed to believe.
And I will do everything in my power. Anything in my power to protect this place.
So that film was made by some very talented filmmakers that are on my team. Neil Jelinas was the director of it, and it featured this young Angolan scientist, Ajani Costa. And you see pictures here of Ajani and our chief scientist, and this is taken in Luanda, Angola, just a few months ago. And what is this? This is a memo of understanding and a commitment from the Angolan government to protect the highlands. And that wouldn't have happened without a very committed team on the ground in Angola, but also international pressure that are built when you create a feature doc that is good enough, and excellence matters, to get into a film festival like Tribeca. And I want to end with one other program that we're working on, that the impact is not as direct. It's not us saying we want this area protected. We want this community to have what it needs in terms of resources. This is in enabling others to tell their own story, which is something that we're working a lot with at National Geographic on the nonprofit side of how do we create a community of diverse photographers, writers, filmmakers, because our stories that we want to tell are diverse. So we have a project called Photo Camp. It's been running for over a decade, and we go around the world. In the last 3 years, we've worked almost exclusively with refugee students and teach them to tell their own story. So I just can't talk to this group without sharing my favorite story that I've been involved with in the last couple of years, and it's the story of someone named Boland.
My name is Akwat Cholmayak, known as Boland. I love my country. And this is where my journey started. I started this journey when the National Geographic Photo Camp team came to my country, Juba, South Sudan. Coming to develop and to inspire the young photographers to tell their stories using their lenses. It's a tool that makes you to explore your nature, and it's a tool that speaks out your voice. And that's why I took this opportunity.
Now is the time to pass out cameras, and then we'll talk through how to use the camera.
This training was really challenging because I was new to the camera and how I can tell a story with it. I met Eddie Kashi when he was my trainer. He was passionate about photography.
Boland was one of a handful of people that it was just from the beginning, it was like, these people not only have their act together, but they are super motivated. And Boland was one of those people. Hold that, that's beautiful. Where you just could sense that for him, this was a real opportunity. Here's when we knew we had a special one on our hands. Boland went out, he didn't have a camera.
So I used my own SD card, whereby I can borrow a camera from the rest of my colleagues.
He would ask someone to borrow their camera, stick his card in, make pictures, then pull his card out and give the camera back.
I entered some of those photos into UNESCO photo contest.
They won a UNESCO photo award.
The first prize was the camera that I won. That was really what motivated me more.
That is determination.
It's all about passion, what you have in your art. Eddie Kashi helped me in that passion, a passion that you can tell the story to the rest of the world.
So now he's working with a couple of wire service agencies. His work is being distributed globally. Now he is teaching younger photographers in these photo camps.
And I'm inspired to develop another new generation of photographers who need the camera so that they can tell their own stories to the other part of the world.
So that's your feel-good story, and I would say to the students, if things seem tough for you, just think about Boland, who was a refugee, who grew up in a refugee camp, and when he says my colleagues, they were aid workers there that he would borrow cameras from. But what's been interesting as we've been doing photo camp is that now we use people like Boland to teach these camps, and the types of photos that we're getting are so much more interesting, right? When teachers come from the places where these communities are. And so this is a shameless plug, but because you're in DC in the most beautiful time of the year and you can walk over there, head over to the Kennedy Center between now and June 20th, because we have a PhotoCamp exhibit up that's in the entire Hall of Nations and Hall of States that features work of over 100 of these students. And then finally, I want to end with National Geographic gives grants. We give over 500 grants a year. We have something called early career grants. These are for basically the equivalent in science is up to postdocs, right? They're between $3,000 and $5,000. We give them to journalists, so storytellers, teachers, scientists, researchers, conservationists, technologists, who are working on areas that we care about. We have a request for proposal out right now about documenting human migration and marine plastic, but then we have some wide open grants. Please apply. And I will just give a tip for grant applications. If you aren't being turned down and rejected for grants, you aren't applying to enough of them. So it's okay. It's okay if you don't get your first grant you apply for. Keep applying. And that's it for me. I just want to say that, thank you for caring about storytelling. Thank you for caring about the environment. And if you can figure out a way to marry those two things, you have some secret sauce. So thank you very much.
In a few minutes, I brought you your water in a Tom Zaki reusable container.
Very good.
Called a glass.
Very good.
It's amazing what you can do. I just wonder, as people in the room are thinking about their storytelling and this whole idea of connecting impact and to audience, where do you start? Do you start with this is the impact, or do you start with the audience? In other words, who might be receptive to a message or who's resistant to a message, and then you go from there?
Well, I think you have to have an idea first of why are you doing this?
Why are you doing it?
What do you want to change? An impact, if you think about the true meaning of the word, what's an impact is when something crashes into something and it changes it.
Right.
Right, so you want to crash into something and change a system, a mindset, a law, whatever. So what do you want to change? And then who has the power to change it?
Could you tell us a little bit about this goal that you set out at the beginning of protecting 30% of the planet? That is an audacious goal. And what does that mean, and where does that come from?
Audacious goal that National Geographic will definitely not do alone. First of all, we don't own 30% of the planet, so we can't technically just protect it. It would be easy if we did. But everything worthwhile, I think, is hard and requires partnership.
Right.
And so right now we're working on many fronts. We, of course, I talked a lot about our media and our storytelling campaigns where we're trying to start working on this. You'll see hashtag Campaign for Nature coming out and 30 by 30. But then we have a whole team working on the policy side. So in 2020, the Convention for Biodiversity, and Dr. Lovejoy is here who can speak more about this if people have questions, will be in China. And what we're trying to do is do some preceding, some lobbying to try to convince government leaders that they all need to sign on to this goal, similar to the Paris Accord for climate.
Yeah. How many people in the audience have gone for a hike in the mountains? Okay. How many people have gone for a paddle on a river or a lake or an ocean? Okay. How many people have been to a national park? Okay, we have a pretty good audience.
That's good.
By the way, I'm raising my hand for all those things. How do you define protect? Okay, I mean, when we went to the Amazon with Tom Lovejoy, and Tom has contributed to the protection of, Tom, is it 50% now of the rainforest? 50% of the rainforest, all right? But the question of how we define protect is worth a little bit of explanation.
Yeah, and I think we have to be careful to not just have a completely Western view of this, right? Because particularly as an American, when we came to this country, there were wide swaths of land that the settlement impact was very low.
Right.
And many of the native people were forcibly moved off of those lands.
Certainly were.
And so we were able to say, this is what a protected area looks like. Yellowstone, bigger than the state of Rhode Island, right? This is a protected area. But that model doesn't work in the rest of the world. So we can define protection in different areas. I would say no extractive processes is how Pristine Seas defines their marine protected areas. And that is oftentimes a battle with governments who have local fishermen who say, but we've fished here for millennia. And there's different ways to look at that. Some of that is you have easements for people who this is their cultural homeland, this is what they're doing. Some of it is we've shown in the ocean in particular, if you protect an area, the fish there do so well that they spill out into other areas and the fishing actually gets better around.
But you have to tell that story to get people to sign on to that
story and show the economic benefit.
Exactly.
And there's some stories that are told around, one manta ray is worth, I think it's 100-fold, is a commodity for a diving tourism industry than it is as a piece of meat, right?
So it's worth 100 times what it is as food if it can be used to drive a sort of tourism or visit or research or whatever.
I was just in Baja California and I paid $500 to dive with a whale shark. Times how many of me?
Well, you
right?
haven't. I hope you haven't had a whale shark steak anytime soon.
No. Whale shark's kind of an extreme example, but you understand where I'm saying here is people are willing to pay. But
well, look what Costa Rica has. I mean, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, Sven Lindblad is with us now from Lindblad Expedition. So Sven is here personally. So Sven, thanks. And Sven has built a business with you on this very thing, is tapping into. I mean, this was every hand went up here, and so there's a market for this. But you have to convince that to places that haven't done it traditionally or distrust it. I mean, so what's your obstacle in getting that done?
I think it's different in every place. I think it's sometimes it's economic.
Right.
Sometimes it's political pressure. Sometimes, and we are not, unfortunately, immune from this, whereas political leaders also have industry interests. Or there are a lot of different
where
ways.
extractive industries are very profitable for the government and for the people who are there, right?
Absolutely.
Can you accommodate both?
I think you can. I think you can. I would say we have to figure it out. But there are some places where it's not worth it.
Do you have a favorite story that you've done? Documentary, project?
I don't know. I mean, I'm so high on photo camp right now. Every single story that comes out of there is great. I did some great stories with Dennis Dimmock, who's in the audience, around food that I still think about, because for me, food was one of the favorite topics I ever covered, because you can talk about culture and energy and economy and
technology,
everything through food, and I think
it tastes good.
It does. I try to have some of it at least 3 times a day. So that's one of my favorite stories. Yeah.
Questions for Kaitlin. Who's got a question for National Geographic? Let's start over here. Let's get a mic over here. Please tell us who you are and where you're from. If you keep your question short, we'll get as many in as we can.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Parsons, and I'll be graduating from the University of Georgia next month.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So my question is very related to what you asked her about the pristine seas and how we define protected areas. And so my question is, when you're talking about and you're telling a story about protecting areas and humans, how do you mediate are humans natural, where do humans fall, are pristine places where humans don't belong? How do you mediate the language for how humans interact with nature?
Absolutely, and I would say my immediate answer is there is no one way to do it. Every place you go, the cultural sensitivity, the cultural history is different. One of my favorite stories that I've just recently heard is some of the Pacific Island nations are actually protecting everything above a certain elevation point on their islands, and that's because their mythology says that above that point is sacred and holy. It also happens to be where their water comes from, water tower. So I think those stories—
That may not be entirely coincidental, right? Where those stories came from and where that source of life came from.
So those stories, if you can figure out the cultural sensitivity around each one, our entire vernacular vocabulary changes, right? There are some areas that are protected, have been protected by pristine seas that are totally closed, and they are only open for research. Other areas have thriving businesses, the Galapagos, to go, some people from here will go, to go dive and experience. There are some areas that have, artisanal fishing right up to the edges.
Question from this side of the room? Right here. Got a mic to you? It's on the way. Grant is running with the mic.
Good morning. My name is Devin Camilleri. I'm from the SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry. My question for you, and by the way, National Geographic is my dream company to work for, but
you should apply for an internship.
No plug
you
there.
Sitting there is amazing to me. It's the closest I've ever been to my dream. But my question for you is, how does National Geographic go about involving Indigenous groups in community engagement, in research, and making sure those voices aren't lost?
Absolutely, and I think this is the biggest paradigm shift we've seen in conservation in the last few years, is that particularly in the African, Latin American context, is recognizing that Indigenous communities are the best stewards of the land, right? They understand the land better than we ever will as an outside person, right? And so one thing we do is in our grant making and our fellowships, we have a target goal of 70% of the funds that go out are international. And we have grant officers working in Kigali, Rwanda, and Mexico City, working on making sure that that's our funding mechanism. It's not an overnight switch, right? We are really committed to capacity building in terms of making sure that the scientific knowledge and the storytellers come from those communities as well. But then also, I think a lot of this issue, of which I'm not an expert in, there are many people who are, comes from the same place where any good journalist would work, of listen, right? Just listen. We don't know very much, and people who are from a piece of land or ocean know it better than we ever will. And apply for an internship, everyone. Oh, good.
All right, time for one more. Have I got somebody in the back of the room here, on the side of the room? Let's go over here, to the side of the room.
Hi there, I'm Colin. I'm a photojournalist at Northwestern and a correspondent here at Planet Forward, and I've had trouble in my last 7 years of work trying to find a way to connect with the people I'm photographing so I don't feel like just a parachute journalist, trying to build a connection that not only shows like that you know the subject, but that the subject wants to tell their story. So how do you go about doing that?
Oh, wow. We need more than whatever minus time we have now. But I would say, you know, how do you have a conversation with anyone, right? How do you build a connection, and how do you spend time with someone? I will say one of the biggest challenges is time, right? This is any relationship you have, with time comes comfort and ease, and at some point someone forgets you have a camera, right? And they're just themselves with you. So if you can, and this is a luxury, if you can, spend as much time with your subjects with your camera down, right? Because it's very different if Frank and I are talking like this than if we're like this, right? And so at some point though, Frank and I will be close enough that he'll be fine with this if we spent enough time.
Oh, so maybe.
Maybe. But this is the luxury of time, and if you can figure out a way to do that, I think you will.
Where is Dennis in the room? Where is Dennis? All right, see Dennis over there? Find Dennis and ask him that. Dennis is an amazing photographer, and there are other amazing photographers, but Dennis has already gotten shouted out once, so we'll shout him out again. I just want to thank you immensely. I want to make one note. Boland in that clip that you ran had the following quote: "It's all about passion, what you believe in your heart. And whatever you do, and wherever you go, and whoever you try to connect with, if it is motivated by your passion, if you believe in something and it's genuine, that conveys, that comes across. And that is what should drive you. Connect with know your passion, and that'll change, all right? That is something that you will discover too, but connect with that, and I believe that that's the first step. Don't you? To great storytelling, to great anything.
Great anything.
Connecting.
Yeah.
Know your passion. Kaitlin, thank you so much. We are, and I see the Ensors here. You have some help from the Okavango.
I do.
Kaya Ensor was on the Okavango team.
She was one of the filmmakers.
Are you hanging around for a bit?
I will be.
Okay, so you can talk to Kaitlin, and I hope not be too aggressive with the internships that you want, but feel free. And I also want to thank a special shout out to National Geographic for helping us with this. We're going to have a National Geographic photographer tomorrow.
Yep.
Who is?
Steve Winter.
Who has done?
Big cats. If you've seen the iconic panther in front of the Hollywood sign or any tiger picture you've seen that you've said, how'd they do that?
His work will take your breath away, and you can ask that and other questions of him tomorrow. And I'm hoping that we're going to be doing some other things with National Geographic here at Planet Forward, so stay tuned as we say. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right.